It is my pleasure to begin our conversation today by introducing our speakers. We have Ron Berger joining us from EL Education, Senior Advisor in Teaching and Learning. We have Margarita Celestino, recently graduated senior from Casco Bay High School in Portland, Maine. Pamela Cantor, MD, founder and senior science advisor at Turnaround for Children and a Sold Alliance governing partner. Linda Darling Hammond, president and CEO of the Learning Policy Institute, as well as a Sold Alliance governing partner. Karen Pittman, founder and senior fellow of the Forum for Youth Investment and a Sold Alliance governing partner. And Marita Irby, co-founder of the Forum for Youth Investment and and the executive vice president of the Forum for Youth Investment. And Caroline Quintana, Senior Director for Social Emotional Academic Achievement at the Institute for Student Achievement and the former principal of Bronxdale High School in New York City. Welcome to all of our speakers today. We're gonna start off our conversation by asking Margarita to go ahead and turn on your camera. Hi, Margarita, it's good to see you. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
We're so glad that you could join this conversation and to kick off our launch of our design principles for schools. You and I were able to meet yesterday and have a little bit of a discussion, and I was so proud and honored to learn a little bit more about your story and background. And I want to welcome you to this conversation on behalf of the Sold Alliance, and thank you and congratulations to graduating from Casco Bay High School and for all of your achievements. And I'd like to just kick off the conversation by asking you to share a little bit about who you are with our audience today.
So my name is Margarita Celestino. I recently graduated from Casco Bay High School in Portland, Maine last week, Thursday. And I'm the oldest of 4 children, the only girl too. I'm from Angola. I was born in Luanda, which is Southwest Africa, and recently migrated to the United States about 4 years ago. So just before I started high school.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing that about your background. Now let's dive into your experience at Casco Bay. We talked a little bit about that yesterday, and you know about the design principles. So would you share with our audience today, what about your experience over the last 4 years at Casco were the most important and meaningful aspects of your learning experience, and what got you to where you are today?
I feel like expeditionary learning in general was what really helped me or sustained me throughout my high school career, because I understood why I was doing the work that I was doing as we were taking out the work that we're doing in school and bringing it out to the community and making expeditions and projects. And I also had a lot of support from my teachers. Our teachers are really connected with their students. They really care about their students, and they try to understand and know their students in and outside of school. And I feel like that was one of the reasons, or what really took me from just being like a shy freshman to a good senior who's trying to be more, doing more activities outside of school and being more vulnerable with the community and just being out there.
That's great. We talked a little bit yesterday about how meaningful the crew experience was at Casco. Can you share with our audience what was so powerful about that experience and the relationships that you built as part of a crew at Casco?
So being part of the crew at Casco Bay is being put together randomly during your freshman year with 14 or 15 other students in a classroom. A lot of people call it like the advisory or homeroom. And you stay with those 14, 15 peers for 4 years, since freshman to senior year, and you really get to know people. You really get to know the people in your crew because you see them grow. You're like having a front row seat of their growth, of their high school growth, not just in like classes, but just get to experience and live life with them, kind of, because every year at the end of the school year we have presentations where we have different themes from freshman year to senior year, where we culminate by doing a presentation about ourselves, about our lives inside and outside of school, which helps us understand our peers and know what it is that they go through outside of school, what makes them them, and how they just deal with life in general.
That's great. I know we don't have too much more time, but as we dive into the design principles with our audience today, would you help us understand from your perspective as a young person who's just gone through high school, what would you want our audience today to most understand is really so important about how they think about designing the kind of environments that help you thrive that you would want to see for all young people in this country?
I feel like teacher to student connection is like number one, at least for me, because I don't think that I would be a successful student if I didn't know that my teachers genuinely cared about me, and not just about me getting an A+ in their class. They genuinely cared about me being well. They cared about me striving for my personal best. And I saw that. And being a student, seeing that also motivates me to keep going. And it motivates me to even do better because I know that there are people who got my back. Now, if a teacher is just like teaching and doing their job, getting the job done and leaving, I would honestly not feel like, oh, the teacher really wants me to succeed. So I feel like having the connections, having good relationship with my teachers is what was the most important thing. And it still is something that I want to carry out until I go to college and further my education.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you bringing this small window into your experience in your life and sharing that with us and helping to kick off this launch of the design principles. Congratulations again to you and to your family on your Quest Bridge Scholarship, and good luck at Colgate this fall. We really look forward to all the wonderful things that you're going to accomplish in college and in your life. Congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And with that, I would like to now introduce my dear colleague, Dr. Pamela Cantor from Turnaround for Children, who's going to take us into the design principles for schools, a little bit of a deep dive and a grounding in this new resource. We're so excited, Pam, to have you join us today, and would love for you to go ahead and take it away now.
I think my video is on mute.
Okay.
Unless you don't want video. So
No.
just
Let's try to fix that.
oops.
There you are. I
Right?
can see now.
Okay. Okay, so you can see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So the story I will tell is that in 2017, we became one of the leaders of the Science of Learning and Development Alliance, which, as you know, is a group that came into being with lead funding and visionary leadership from Jim Shelton and Brooke Stafford Brizard at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. At the time, there were diverse scientific theories being applied to education, but not a coherent way of bringing them together to make them easily and maximally useful in education practice. Our group of partners began by producing a major synthesis of diverse scientific fields, seeking convergence in the hopes that there would be clear and coherent themes that would lead to implications for practice. This became the 3 sole papers that were published in Applied Developmental Science. The challenge was to answer the question, exactly what science should we pay attention to in order to transform to an equitable education system, one that would develop the whole child, and what would be the implications for practice? We knew that what we brought together might not be complete, though there was a great effort to be comprehensive and to have precise standards for what came into the synthesis. We knew that scientific discovery does not stop just because papers get published. And we also knew that even with these papers published, that academic papers by themselves don't lead to innovations, especially innovations that grapple with implementation challenges, scale, systemic and policy barriers, all of which are so important to systems change. This is what led to the next phase of the work, the Whole Child Design Initiative, an initiative led by LPI, Turnaround, and the Forum for Youth Investment, and a broad interdisciplinary group of advisors. And today, this group is launching the first of the 2 playbooks called Design Principles, Putting the Science of Learning and Development into Action. One version will be applied in schools and the other in community learning settings. I don't think we could ever have imagined when we started this, a time that is crying out for the kind of transformational change represented in these playbooks. Today, we're living in a world dramatically altered by COVID, an event that has exposed the dramatic inequalities in living in America, along with the dramatic inequalities in the conditions for learning in America. And there is an opportunity today like no other, including the funding available to establish this kind of transformational change. Yet a crisis looms over K-12 education this fall. It's rising like a wave that could obscure more than it reveals about what is underneath, especially if we oversimplify what we're looking at. There are assumptions and dominant narratives, the trauma of COVID, the impact of racialized violence, the historic inequities of educational opportunity, the problem of learning loss and lost learning time, the beliefs that young people have about whether they and their identities and cultures are welcome in their learning communities, and the fears that many young people have about their futures. These are assumptions that could lead us to miss what students have gained, even though all of us know from our own lives that crises often reveal our assets and our strengths. And I fear that we might not be looking as hard as we should for those qualities in our kids. And then think about how many of our students, particularly the most vulnerable, will often internalize these messages about difference as damage or loss as personal failure, a narrative that runs counter to everything we know about development and learning. So this begs the question, are we looking at different problems, or are we looking at different faces of the same problem? That learning is variable, that disruptions to development happen all the time, and could these narratives instead be a result of a longstanding failure to see that the approaches we've taken thus far to learning in schools have not fully challenged our assumptions about learning? Is it variable, or does it fall into a bell curve? Is it defined by our genes or by the context and opportunity that drives their expression? Are skills malleable or fixed? Is talent plentiful or scarce? Or human potential, what would any child be capable of under favorable conditions? The good news is that development and learning science paint an optimistic picture about what all young people are capable of, that children's brains and bodies and abilities are malleable to experience, and they are malleable over time. In fact, most of the growth of the human brain happens after we're born. So there are multiple opportunities to catch up and grow, including and especially now, if we recognize that children engage most readily from an awareness of their strengths, and children become most aware of their strengths if they have adults that see them even before they do. So we do have an opportunity today to create a richness and equity of context that will determine who they become, how they learn, and even influence the expression of their genes. If we optimize the design of context and opportunity, we optimize the possibility that young people will not only catch up and recover from the effects of this year, but we will have made a big down payment on the learning settings we need to build for our kids and the adults around them and their futures. We've done that for some kids, mostly middle class and affluent kids, kids who will have an easier time surmounting the effects of this year. But we haven't done this for all of our children. And we especially have not done this for students of color, students from marginalized groups, students who learn differently, and students who have known trauma and adversity. For all these reasons, the timing of this body of work is prescient. Today, those who have known some sort of adversity are frankly, most of us. This is the inflection point we're in. And what happens from here depends on the things we decide to invest in. So there's a big opportunity today if we already use what we know from the science of learning and development to simultaneously address the acute needs that kids have in a truly fulsome way. If we accelerate, not remediate, if we build from assets and strengths, and at the same time, make a big down payment on the system we need to build that will deliver on the promise of equity for all of our children. The insights from brain science align profoundly with what so many parents want for their kids and what so many teachers have been saying for years, that we can create learning environments and a system that recognizes children as whole people, values their assets, and supports them to excel in myriad ways. I think, just one sec. I'm not seeing my screen. Okay. Developmental and learning sciences are really clear about what we need to do. Let's scale the use of these essential guiding principles for whole child design. Let's build environments, both inside and outside of schools, that create a succession of opportunities in which children discover who they are and who they can become. A system mapped to the way the brain learns and children grow, which is what we have designed together through this process. This is a design that's encompassing, holistic, equitable, that combines positive developmental relationships, environments filled with safety and belonging, rich, meaningful learning experiences, the intentional development of the critical skills, habits, and mindsets that all successful learners have, and integrated support systems. If we go one level deeper on each, that relationships are important is not new knowledge. Relationships engage children in ways that help them define who they are, who they can become, and how they are important to other people. On safety and belonging, in virtually every study of positive youth development, there is always one finding right at the top. Children will struggle to engage and learn if they don't feel physically, emotionally, and identity safe, when they don't feel like they and their culture are represented and valued in their learning community. On rich learning experiences, well, these are the kinds of personalized instructional experiences that engage us and challenge us, where we discover what we're capable of. On skills, habits, and mindsets, the science of learning and development tells us that learning is integrated. There's not a math part of the brain separate from the creative part of the brain, which means that we need to focus on developing skills intentionally, like self-regulation, executive functions, social skills, growth mindset, resilience, perseverance, and self-direction. Because when these are integrated with content, these skills work together to produce higher order 21st century skills like problem solving, collaboration, metacognitive and analytic skills, and mastery level competencies. And on integrated supports, learning environments need to be set up today more than ever with many more protective factors in place, including health, mental health, social service, as well as opportunities to extend learning beyond the school day and across settings. But here's the secret sauce. The development of a whole child emerges when we combine these elements into experiences that connect to one another. And if you want to picture this, picture a shape like a web of experiences, because this is how our brains develop. Lots of connections between structures, and it's these connections that produce increasingly complex skills. Schools designed this way, using the levers of human development and science, such that what one child can do, nearly all children can do under highly favorable conditions. Settings designed like this can see and unleash the potential in each and every child, no matter where their learning journey begins. I remember once walking into a school that I was considering for my son, and I asked, what kind of child can thrive here? And I'll never forget the answer coming from just one school. All children can thrive here. Well, that's what the Science of Learning and Development and the Whole Child Initiative are all about. All settings, all learners, all adults. Thanks so much for letting me talk with you today.
Thank you, Pam. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the passion that you just brought to this conversation. I think it's so important to the work that you're doing, and followed on the passion that Margarita brought at the top of this discussion. And so at this point, it's my great honor to invite the rest of our panel, including Linda, Caroline, Ron, and Karen. If you would go ahead and turn on your cameras to join us. Welcome to the conversation. We're so excited to listen and to learn with you today. Are we all here? Great, I see everybody on camera now. Welcome, everybody. I'm gonna kick off the conversation, Linda, first with a question for you. Building on what you heard from Margarita and what Pam just laid out, could you let everybody online know, grounded in the design principles for schools, how do these design principles show up in schools, or how should they show up in the learning settings that we design for kids?
Well, as Pam already said, there are both structures and practices that we want to see in schools that really wrap around every child and enable every child to thrive. There are a lot of schools that have actually designed around these principles, and others that we hope will be able to help to do so. And when you go into these schools, you'll see, first of all, structures that are designed to enable adults and children to know each other well. Those might include strategies for looping from grade to grade with the same teacher, having advisory systems where one adult works with 15, 20 students over multiple years, sometimes teaching teams that share students, so that it is possible for teachers to care effectively for children. Teachers do care, but if you're teaching 180 kids a day and you never have a way to orchestrate a support system, it's very hard for children to feel that caring. So number one, you'll see those kinds of structures that support relationships with families, home visits, student-teacher family conferences, a variety of mechanisms that get those relationships to be strong so everyone can raise the child together. You'll see the kind of work where kids are engaged in inquiry and engaging, authentic projects that give them many ways in, and teachers can provide good supports and scaffolds for the learning process. You'll see authentic assessments where, rather than bubbling in on multiple choice tests, kids are actually demonstrating what they know and can do by presenting their learning, by developing products and other representations of their work. There'll be connections to the outside of school, to the community. Quite often the projects are in the community and engage in issues or problems in the community that kids care about, so that they're studying things that are relevant. You'll see them in what we think of as an identity-safe environment. That is an environment that is representing a range of cultures and contexts that in which teachers make a very strong proactive efforts to demonstrate to each child that they are understood, cared for, where teachers learn about the community and about the children and families so that they can make the connections with the curriculum, and so that we've got the kind of social and emotional supports that go hand in glove with academic supports to produce an environment which is safe psychologically as well as physically, that is caring, that is supportive, and that is restorative, where there may be events that create a moment of conflict or challenge or trauma, where there are systems to bring everyone together in the community to ensure that the response is to draw students in with their families rather than to exclude them. So all of these things, plus the integrated supports that you may need for healthcare, mental health care, community connections, before and after school care, are in the whole child environment. We have schools that have done this. It is not the way that our factory model schools were designed back in 1920. And so to get to this kind of setting takes a lot of consistent and coherent adult effort to rethink many of the things we might have inherited to get to a place where children are supported in their thriving from every aspect.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. And Karen, building on the points that Linda just made about community, how can you share with the audience today how the design principles also show up in other learning settings where kids are learning and developing?
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask Joaquin, if you can, just to actually put the wonderful blue wheel up on the screen so that people can see it. I think it's actually more interesting than I am.
Okay, give me just a moment. I'll do that right now.
That's great. I love the fact that you asked the question, how do they show up in community settings? And I'll give you a one-word answer. And that answer is they show up naturally. And that comes from the fact that these community settings are places where young people go voluntarily. There are places that families seek out to make sure that their young people are getting those whole child skills that we just talked about. And so because these are places that are in the community, and we're talking about not just through sort of national affiliate youth organizations like Boys and Girls Clubs and WISE, we're talking about libraries, we're talking about museums, community rec centers, faith organizations that have youth clubs, and police athletic leagues, sports clubs, all of the kinds of things that are in communities that families and young people look for. We know from a recent study that Learning Heroes just did a survey of parents and teachers and professionals working in these community youth organizations, that about 65% of parents say that they have their young people in one or more of these kind of programs, with the average being 2. So this is really a place that parents and young people understand that they complement schools, and they're looking for ways to build these skills and build these competencies in voluntary, interest-driven supports. So when we look at this wonderful wheel, one of the things, and we have been using this with community organizations for years now, since we first saw it, the early versions from Pam, and they resonate immediately. And what they resonate with as are what we would call non-negotiables. This is what they think they're doing. Programs think that they are starting with relationships because they are voluntary. They are really interested in making sure that young people feel safe and belong, because if they don't, they won't come back. They are offering rich, interest-driven experiences, not always academic, but they're really trying to figure out what young people are interested in, where their passions are, and how to help them, whether that's in art, it's in religion, it's in music, it's in STEM, it's in car mechanics or bike repair, whatever it is. They assume, when you look at their websites of most youth organizations, they will talk to you about the kind of competencies that they are trying to help young people build, that they're building character, they're building social skills, they're helping them learn empathy and be parts of teams. These are the kind of metrics that they look for when they say, this is why young people should come to our programs. And these are frankly the kind of metrics that parents look for and that young people look for. The support systems, the integrated supports are there in a lot of ways, depending on the kind of larger organizations that these settings, these community learning settings are housed in. So if they're housed in a United Way setting, or if they're housed in an urban league, they're housed in a museum, they're going to have different access to different kinds of supports. But a lot of these organizations are very much committed to doing those, making sure young people are connected to basic services, but also integrated supports means helping them sometimes with academics and helping families have better connections with schools. So from this community learning settings perspective, one of the things that I want to make sure we understand is that in some ways, the organizations that we work with, and a part of the Formed Youth Investment is called the Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality. You've got a natural commitment to do these things. The question in youth organizations and in community organizations is, can we do them better? And so they are eager to assess the context that they create and make sure that they're improving practices. So Marita will talk to you in a minute about the community playbook that's going to come out. And it is different in some ways because there is already an assumption that these are the right things to do, with a different balance than you see in schools necessarily. But because that's there, the other thing that makes this playbook important when we come to it is those words around the outside of the wheel: transformative, personalized, empowering, and culturally affirming. The organizations that we're talking about that house these array of settings are very different organizations. Faith organizations, museums, libraries, civil rights organizations, national youth organizations, they all have some combination of trying to do this kind of transformative empowerment work. And because they are so different, the opportunities and the diversity of how young people and adults come together in settings is actually much more diverse than it is in schools. One very quick example, and then I will pause, is in schools, we tend to group young people by age and ability. In these organizations, they're grouped by interest. You may have, I was in a youth orchestra, and there were people from 6 to 19 in the youth orchestra, and where you sat depended on how well you played your instrument. It had nothing to do with your age. Those are the kind of complementary experiences that you get in these organizations. So yes, we get care, but we also really get learning and support in really complementary ways that really get to the whole child.
Great, really, thank you for laying that out. It really provides a nice view of the out of school ecosystem and web, as Pam put it, that really is present in lots of places, but needs to be stitched together much more comprehensively for all young people to thrive. Ron, I'd like to bring you into the conversation now and kind of picking up on what Karen just said about, a lot of this for a lot of educators and practitioners online today are not new. They've seen these terms and have wrestled with these concepts before. Can you share a little bit about how EL education really does take the full complement of the Blue Wheel and elevates that in your model?
Thank you, Joaquin. The first thing I'd say is we are so proud at EL Education to be part of this old alliance. We've been around for about 30 years. And from our inception, we never separated the social and emotional health of students and their character development from their academic success. Because as Pam stated really clearly in the beginning of this, those things are intertwined. Like all learning is social and emotional. You cannot succeed if you don't feel like you belong, if you don't have confidence as a learner. And just to point out an example of why those things can work synergistically and how they work synergistically, I was proud of Margarita because she's in one of our schools, right? She's an amazing kid. And when Margarita spoke to you today, she was the graduation speaker Thursday night for her graduating class. But the powerful thing about the Sold Wheel is that Margarita is not alone in that, because when she spoke Thursday night, 99% of her classmates graduated with her on time. 99%. And since her school has opened, 99% of students have been accepted into college. And this is a regular public non-charter school that works mostly with students of low-income families and students of color and students of immigrant students like Margarita. They're having that success because they have built the whole child vision in supporting and affirming every child into their work. So to me, the most important message of today's webinar is that this is not an add-on. This is not an extra thing. This is the way you do school. And I think, Linda, you made that so clear to us. It's the structures of school all day long that make this wheel come to life. It's not an extra thing that you add on. This is why we all got into education in the first place, to support children to be the best that they can be. And I'll end by saying, for a long time, people said to us, well, you can't scale what you're doing at Casco Bay High School with people like Margarita. Like that can't grow quickly. Well, we created an open source literacy curriculum that combines the elements of the Blue Wheel, whole child, visionary vision of students about supporting their social, emotional, and character growth at the same time as they're learning to read and write. And we are now reaching almost 500,000 students with that free curriculum. Every student in Detroit, in Richmond, in Raleigh, in Des Moines, now in Oakland, like every student is successfully using that curriculum because it combines social, emotional, and character growth with literacy growth. Those things are not separate. As everyone has said so beautifully on this piece, those things work together synergistically. And every district and school really needs to now rethink, how do we make that blue wheel come to life all day long in our schools?
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And thank you for sharing the tremendous accomplishment and the hard work that EL has been engaged in for such a long time. Caroline, can I bring you in and just to build on what Ron just said, this is how school is done. You were a principal for many years at Bronxdale High School in New York City. Could you share with us a little bit about how you did school and where you see elements of the blue wheel reflected in the practice that you engaged with?
Absolutely. And it's interesting too, now that I'm doing work that's around socio-emotional and academic development, it necessarily overlaps with this wheel, all of the seed work that schools are really looking at in terms of redesign. And I think that's how I started Bronxdale. I took over a school that was and you know, going through some hard times, and had to get staff to be on board and be friendly with one another. And we needed to take that graduation rate that was in the low 30s as high as possible in the Bronx. And it started with, you know, what Ron said. This was not something that I didn't have language for all of these things yet. I didn't know that there wasn't a wheel yet. There weren't these pieces, but I knew that it was really important to take care of people. And it was important for folks to feel safe. And that when both the adults and the children did, they would try things, they would take risks. And if they knew that we cared about them, they would care about school too. And so it was really important to model that, to make mistakes in front of my staff. But it was also really important to develop language together and to develop those relationships, right? And so you start to see all of these pieces of the wheel that were part of the school from the get-go. And that meant that we needed to work on building relationships, because sometimes my teachers' experiences in their own school hadn't been one where they had those kinds of interactions with their teachers, right? And so we needed to work with one another on what it meant to collaborate and to be on teams. And we created those small communities through advisory, through grade teams. Our grade teams knew our students inside and out. And they used apps and things to keep track of kids. You know, when someone got off the bus, the rest of us already knew disposition walking in. And so we could say like, hey, you know, I noticed that, and take care of the child all day long, making sure that that child was going to be successful, make sure that that child was going to feel supported all the way through. And so when we talk about those environments that are safe and the supports that are there, it was all of those pieces combined. But I think something really important that Ron also mentioned was, and then there was the curriculum, right? The instruction is incredibly important. So we developed structures in classrooms for students to learn to interact with each other. It started with silly sentence starters and pieces like that. And it developed over time to be something very sophisticated where kids could push and really ask questions and develop. We started with capstones that were guided in 9th grade to independent research projects that are very much about what interests them and necessarily had an impact on the community. And so building up those pieces, but teaching the kids really, and the adults, what does effective communication between people look like? What does it mean to take a stance and defend it? What does it mean to agree or to change my mind? And really encouraging people to think flexibly. You really need all of these structures in place for that to be possible. And so it was always part of how we had thought about Bronxdale. It was a little bit tricky to do given the district that we were in, the demands at the time, state accountability, language that was different. You know, we found ourselves doing things like creating glossaries of what we did in our school so that folks who came in would know what that made reference to. But through that, we were able to create an environment where, like Margarita said, people really cared about the students, and the students knew that they cared about your well-being, that they cared about your accomplishments, that they cared about what you cared about outside of school too. And bringing some of that into the school, letting kids really bring that into the school.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to open up the next question to everybody on the panel, and really build on what Pam laid out in her opening comments about the moment that we're in, not just revealing the conditions of living in America, but in so many ways, the inequitable conditions of learning in America. So I'd invite any of our panelists to share why they believe instantiation, elevating, making real the design principles in all the places where children learn and develop matters to equity at this moment in time.
There are so many places that this body of work really is essential to and fundamental to equity. First of all, at the core of it is, a notion and a game plan for how every child can be supported, seen, understood, cared for, and enabled to thrive. And of course, the inequities we have in our society are what get in the way of that happening in so many schools, not always intentionally, and in other settings as well, not always intentionally, but just because of the traditions of how people have done things over time, and the implicit bias that operates in so many settings. If you don't actually see people fully, then it's very easy for bias to take over. That part of what educators learn when they have these practices available to them and these structures and contexts available is how to actually create a setting in which kids are in community with each other, where they are known, where their families are known and supported, and where the educational infrastructure and apparatus, all the things that go on, the curriculum, the teaching, the way in which kids are treated in the hallways, in the cafeteria, in the classroom, and so on, are all organized around enabling students to bring their best selves forward without stigma, without stereotype threat, without artificial bell curve strategies that rank and sort people against each other. One of the things we know is that kids learn better, adults learn better in settings where we're really focused on the learning, on the ways in which we can try things and get feedback and revise what we're doing and get more feedback and continue to get better and better with a belief system that will happen, rather than with a belief system that says some people are innately better than others and we're going to put everyone on a bell curve, and you've learned, by your tracking placement where you belong in this system. Once you put that in place, you've already undermined the opportunities for thriving and growth and equity in the way that we know can happen in settings like the ones that Ron described, like Carolyn described, and others.
I would add to that quickly, like King just saying, and Linda mentioned some of these. What we have an opportunity to do is really, with this Blue Wheel, zoom in and really talk about the importance of settings. We often talk about school as this big box of a building, but there are so many different settings inside the school. You have the classroom, and not all classrooms are the same. And then, as Linda said, you've got the cafeteria, you've got the ball fields, you've got the hallways, you've got the bathrooms, the library, the counselor's office, etc. There are adults in or near all of those settings. Those settings each have different characteristics. And what we know now, because of the disruption that happened when schools closed, is that young people lost all of those settings. They didn't just lose the classroom where the academic instruction was happening. And sometimes those other settings and the adults in those settings were as important to them as their teachers. And so when Pam ended with the phrase that we use of all adults, all learners, all settings, we can talk about all systems, but we can start by recognizing the importance of all adults, all learners, all settings in the system that we call school. And when I listened to Margarita and I listened to Ron and Caroline, they basically have activated all of those settings with equal intent, recognizing that they aren't all focused on academic instruction, but they are all critical to the whole child. And that's what we have an opportunity to do. And so when we're talking about equity, really broadening what we're looking at, broadening which settings we're assessing in school and outside of school, we're going to get a really different picture of what we mean by equity.
One of the things that I wanted to add to what Karen and Linda have said is that when I think about the design principles, I am sure that educators and practitioners are looking at this wheel and seeing things that have resonated with them, things that they have done. But one of the things we discovered in the process of doing this is that it's not all that common to do all of them and to do all of them together. And the story that Caroline is telling, I've read the Bronxdale study and obviously know Ron in so many different EL schools. They're doing it all. Okay, they're not picking one element, they're doing it all. And the other thing I want us to also think about is that we tend to view the kids who do it all and the schools that do it all as if they're exceptional or as if they're exceptions. And I don't think that's the case. I think and I hope that one of the results of the design principles work is that it suggests to people, we can do this. We can put these pieces together. Yes, we're going to start at different places, but we can put these pieces together and get more kids experiencing school the way Margarita has.
Yeah, I think that's really important too, is that it's not one thing, it's the combination. Also really important though, that it takes time and it takes revision and it takes constant reflection and that, you know, you can learn. We would visit other schools that were doing things well to learn from them. And so a network is necessary too. We worked with the Institute for Student Achievement so that we could have coaches who supported us because it mattered to us. And so all of the principles of the wheel mattered enough that we wanted to make sure that we had help putting them in place and that we could continue to be reflective and to revise as needed so that we were creating, I think Pam, you said it earlier, the favorable conditions that would ensure that every child can be successful and every child has an opportunity to show us what they're capable of.
Can I just add something about Bronxdale, which, you know, was when Carolyn came in as principal, there had been, it was not working well. There were a lot of fights on the campus. It was a very fragmented and disjointed place, and kids were not being good to each other, and adults were, you know, kind of flummoxed. And so it was a whole process of doing this. But one of the things that impressed me when I visited the school, it's an inclusion school. So it has just a very high number of students with special education identification. And the students were, it wasn't just the adults doing things for the students were empowered to support one another. And so what I loved is that there was some student had done a study of the science of learning and development. It was all on a bulletin board on the wall and things about social emotional experiences and learning and how you can enable yourself to feel more calm, how you can improve the functioning of your brain. There was work on autism awareness that month so that students could understand each other and the experiences that they were having. All kinds of work. There's an affirmation station in more than one classroom where students and teachers were affirming each other in their efforts and their work. And when you talk to kids, they were involved, peer leadership in the advisories, so that they were owning this process of integrating social, emotional, academic, cognitive development, and with a growth mindset, with a community frame that they were in charge of promoting and developing, not just the adults. So I think that's a really big part of the accomplishment, is to really see the whole community in this work.
I love that point, Lyndon. I'm taking over from on facilitation. Joaquin's power went out in his house, and he's lost us entirely. So we're all rolling with this. And I just want to say, I love the conversation. I love the elevation of key points about integration. I love the importance of it can't be one thing. Karen reiterated in the chat if you're missing any component of the wheel. Ron, I wonder if you or Carolyn or Linda or Karen, if somebody can speak specifically to the issue of adult capacity building. How do we build the capacity in adults to deliver on this vision? And what particularly can we be doing in this moment of large influx of new dollars, real questions of how to spend them intelligently? I love a quick whip around on anybody who has thoughts on ways we can build capacity in adults to deliver on this vision before I invite Marita to wrap us up.
I mean, it was absolutely essential for us. I needed to develop the adults if we were going to meet the needs of our students, but also just so that they would understand the importance of context as well. We were in a shared building. There were 5 schools in the building. The building was in not so great conditions. And so we needed to make sure that our school was a welcoming, safe, beautiful space the minute that you walked in, and that was the people. And so I needed to develop them. So we visited places where those practices were already in place with kids who look like ours. I had coaching. I still have coaching for myself, but I had coaching through the Institute for Student Achievement from the moment I stepped into that school. And they still have it, right? As soon as there was a pilot available to do the socio-emotional and academic development work, we invested in that. And it was really important for us to go to trainings together. Anything that I was bringing into the school, absolutely anything. I had either already been trained or went with my staff as well, so that I was never speaking from not having had that same experience, and I could understand what was happening in the classrooms. And teams were a really big part of it, right? And so they supported one another. And I think what was really important is if we wanted kids to make mistakes and be able to learn in those ways, the adults were allowed to do the same, because it was a space where everything is always about growth and development. And when you create that, then people are more likely to grow and embrace and try.
Bethany, I would just say that the student culture of the school is never ahead of the adult culture. So my whole organization is a professional development organization. What we do is we work with school faculties and school staffs so that they can have direct and candid conversations about race, about gender identity, about sexual orientation, about the things that they have to be able to talk to high school kids about. When Margarita entered her school, she entered a place where everyone believed she was going to go to college. And they said, every student in this school goes to college. That's not the mindset of every teacher. And so we had to get together with teachers to discuss what are their impressions of their students? What do they believe in for their students? And we have to discuss race. We have to discuss income. We have to discuss background. Because if teachers can't have those conversations with each other, how can they lead them with kids? How can we address the limiting factors that create these inequities? And before I leave, I do want to give a shout out to Karen and Marita to say, I don't want to take all the credit for Casco Bay High School with Margarita's success, because the Boys and Girls Club was also really instrumental for her. And so it was the combination of this in-school setting where everyone believed in her and every other student's genius and ability, and the fact that there were community supports as well that surrounded that with her. And so the fact that not only is she on a full scholarship to college, but 99% of her class are also in that, it's that combination of everyone working together for those goals.
And just to pick up on that theme of collaboration, the collaboration between folks in the school and the partners who are, also surrounding the child with care and supports of various kinds is important, and the collaboration of staff in the school. In the United States, teachers get on average about 8 hours fewer each week for staff collaboration, learning and development and planning than the average teacher in the world. And so the schools that have redesigned have tried to find ways to find that collaboration opportunity, to allow teachers to work in teams, to support one another in planning and thinking things through, to meet about the kids and say, okay, what can we do to support this child? And then they learn, of course, from each other, as long as we're all encouraged to lean to our better angels and in those conversations. So that piece of collaboration is something that we have to, we can't just send people out for PD. and then hope they can go to an isolated classroom and an isolated place in a school and do this on their own. We have to structure for that collaboration.
So speaking of these themes, I'm Marita Irby, former Youth Investment and co-leads in this with Linda and Pam and our teams who have been working on this. And the exciting part of this, I think, from the outset, which too often does not happen, is from the get-go, this all places, all spaces, all adults was the conversation. And how do you really make this work and think about this in ways across all the settings where learning happens in community. You heard Karen talking about this earlier, but what you're going to hear more about later this summer, coming out in another month or two, is the community-based settings design principles. And as you heard Karen talk about the range of kinds of settings, we had those range of settings represented at the table of advisors in that group, everything from the Boys and Girls Clubs to the urban leagues to the outdoor education folks to the youth-led actions that are happening in communities, having them look at these and say, you know, you're right, Ron, this is why we all got into this business in the first place. And these are the core principles that we carry into our work in all of the places. And how do we think about that more intentionally? It's different language in some cases. The design challenges are different. We saw this in COVID, where both the flexibility allowed these kinds of organizations to respond really quickly, but they're also more vulnerable in not having this kind of some of the infrastructure in all of the places that would really help stand these up over time. So there are different kind of challenges there, similar equity challenges of like what parents can pay for. They tend to think it's a higher quality, and there's a lot of things out there that are not of the same quality. And this is what Karen was talking about with that work as well at the Weikert Center and others to work on that. So our design challenges are different, but I just want to come back to this thing on the collaboration piece, because what this whole initiative has been, I think, focused on is the idea that it does need to, every experience matters, and across all the places we need to be thinking about this. And from the get-go, while our systems may have different language, we are hoping that the next with this is that it really gives a more intentional way for these places and spaces to see each other and say, if we're trying to make sure this happens in the life of every child, of every young person, we have a way to work together across community to be able to make that happen. So more to come on the community-based design principles, and thank you all for just the joy of being a part of this work with you.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Marita. And let me just say, it has been amazing to work with this team, to watch these design principles come to life, to instantiate the science of learning and development design for equity, and more to come. We recognize that people cannot just go ahead and apply this necessarily without more roadmaps. So there are rubrics that are coming, and readiness and investment rubrics that are coming to help people apply them. And we will also have another strategy session on July 13th at 4:30. So mark your calendars. And in that one, we will unpack the community aspects that Marita was just laying out for us, that others have elevated the importance of those pieces to making this whole work. So really grateful to this wonderful set of panelists and to all of you for joining us today. We look forward to more work together to make these design principles live and to elevate the places they already live, like Bronxdale, like Casco Bay. So thanks to everyone. Have a good day. Take care.